Hello and welcome to the February Crane Research Forum. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very glad that you're here. My name is Dr. Rebecca Dorr, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. My colleague Kathy is going to be monitoring our chat box today, and we'll be adding housekeeping items there. These monthly forums feature research on emerging or key topics that impact the field of early childcare and education. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Brett Zyromski. Dr. Zyromski is an associate professor and program chair of the Counselor Education Program here at The Ohio State University. He has presented before international audiences and has authored numerous books and book chapters. His expertise is in adverse childhood experiences, commonly known as ACEs, and he studies what protective factors boost support for children who've experienced these traumatic experiences. He also examines how to deconstruct the systems that create the need for such interventions in the first place, and how to better prepare school counselors in their evaluation of interventions with students who've experienced ACEs. Today, Dr. Zyromski will discuss two specific protective factors, hope and belonging, to buffer against the effect of ACEs. I'm looking forward to this discussion very much, and with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Zyromski.
Thank you. And a special thank you to Dr. Dorr and to Kathy for this opportunity and the invitation. And I'm truly thrilled to be here and to be able to talk about the impact of hope and belonging and the way that these two protective factors can help anyone, adults and children, families, those that are in early child care and education, help those with potential traumas. So you can access the slide deck. Kathy has graciously put that into the chat. It's also, Dr. Dorr sent out a PDF version of this presentation. But the reason that you have the slide deck in the chat is because much of it is for your use. You can kind of deconstruct it, reconstruct it, use it in your own work. Much of it is linked to the sources so that you can use those sources. Many of the slides around adverse child experiences and the protective factors are open source slides that you can use in your own deck for professional development or training or dissemination to families and early childhood educators. So the real hope is that this session is kind of an opportunity for you to advance the work and increase hope and belonging in your own work and in your own lives. So with that, I'm very excited to be here, and this hour is going to go by very quickly because there's a lot to cover. And it's also going to have some engagement between you and me. So we'll start right off with some of the slide decks, and then we're going to go into a Mentimeter. And I might also ask for engagement in the chat. I have the chat open as we're kind of jumping around. So if you have questions and answers, there's the Q&A, and Kathy kind of indicated at the end, we'll do Q&A question responses. But along the way, if you want to interact with each other, with me, you can post in the chat, and I'll try to answer as I go, or let you know, and we will cover those kind of topics that you're asking about in the chat. So again, the link to the slide deck is in front of you on the screen, but it's also in the chat for you to use as well. So we are talking about two particular sciences, really, the science of hope, because hope is used often in terminology that's not really around the research base. So we'll get into the science of hope, and then belonging, which we'll talk about and is often used interchangeably with terms like connectedness, or even like school connectedness, or sometimes even school culture is used interchangeably, although kind of a different construct. But if you think of, or if you hear the word connectedness or belonging, they're used interchangeably in the research even. So we'll kind of use those as we go. It is great to be with you. You had this slide, so I'm not going to go over what Dr. Dorr already introduced, but it is my pleasure to work with schools around the country, and have been for about 20 years now, around different types of efforts to increase every student's success. So we want to make sure that we're serving everyone, and one of the ways that we address those things is determining how to help adults in the building navigate their own traumas from their childhood or current traumas, and then also help students, no matter the age, navigate early childhood traumas or potential traumas. And so the key takeaways that we're hoping that we get to throughout our time today is that hope and belonging are very essential for success in life. And that's true for every single one of us here. And hopefully I'll illustrate that throughout our time together. But there's a science of hope. We'll define it and talk about how you can build it. It's not complicated to build hope, which is also very encouraging. And then belonging is a superpower. It's truly, we call it a superpower for students, because If students at any age or adults have a strong sense of belonging, then they're going to be successful either in school or actually there's research that shows, around the age of midlife, around 50, as the health of your relationships with others is a predictor of the length of your life even. So the sense of connectedness and belonging that we all have with each other in our communities is pretty integral to our health. So the takeaways will hopefully be very, very practical things you can put into your own life, into your own families, communities, and then also into your work in early childhood. So we're going to start with kind of a global view and then narrow down into more of specifics as we go on. And I'm going to need your help with that. And so we're going to engage with each other through Mentimeter as we go forward. So the first thing we're going to talk about is really the constructs of hope and belonging. So when you think about belonging, we're going to use the definition Goodenow and Grady offered back in 1993, which is when we feel accepted. So it's a perspective. When we feel accepted, respected, included, and supported by others. In school settings, it's specifically, there's a lot of different definitions, but generally you can think of it in school and even with early childhood, the quality of the relationships with peers, the quality of relationships with adults in the building, and then do they feel safe? Now, when we think about that last part of it is like, do we feel accepted? We feel included, supported by others? That supportingness in our families, our communities, in the school setting, that supportedness, that feeling safe, that can be affected by a lot of different things. Like, do you feel like you're represented? Do you see someone that looks like you? Do you feel like your culture is included and centered in this school setting? Do you feel like your family members are included in the educational process? All those things can go into feelings of connectedness or belonging. So we want to think about that. We'll start with this kind of unpacking that a little bit more, just having you reflect, where do you feel like you belong? So is it when you feel like you really feel connected when you're away from work, you feel like you're connected with family? Other people feel very connected at work and you feel like you belong there. Sometimes folks feel like their pets or family members, which that really helps them feel like they're connected to themselves and to others. Others really spiritual and religious environments or activities with different organizations. There's people still, there's amazing lifelong fraternities or sororities or other organizations in the community, service activities that creates that connectedness. And for some, it's just a few connect select friends. And so maybe not be family, maybe friends are our family. And so thinking about all those things, we're going to unpack this and I'm going to ask you to help me unpack this. So initially, I'm going to have this up for about 10 seconds, and then I'm going to switch to the actual Mentimeter. If you've never used a Mentimeter before, there's two ways. You can use it with your phone. You can, well, there's lots of ways, but the two ways I'll mention right now is you can use your phone and use the QR code here. You can also go directly to menti.com in a browser, and it will ask for a code if you go to menti.com in the browser. And then you just type in the code 76742918. So I'll type that in the chat. Again, you're going just to menti.com, and then the code is 76742918. And that's the way, oh, I put Meti, so please don't just click on what I typed. Menti.com, you can click on that last post, and it should open up the Mentimeter for you. So we'll go there now, and we're going to have a series of questions around belonging first, and then hope second. And I think there's 5 questions total, so it won't take us too long, but we'll just spend a few minutes gathering our thoughts around hope and belonging and seeing where we're all at with those two constructs. So this is what our Mentimeter looks like before we present it. And then I'm going to move some things over because it's going to take up my whole screen. So I'm going to move you all over to another screen very quickly. And here we go. So, oh, should be presenting. There we go. So at the bottom, I see there's 33 of you, and some of you have already figured out how to use a thumbs up, or you've done this many times before. You can see how people's thumbs are flying off the page here. We've got all sorts of different wonderful colors. So I see lots of people are jumping in and mastering this tech stuff, and maybe you've already been doing this a lot, which is fantastic. Um, I think we have 168 participants here with us today, which is wonderful. Welcome, everybody. And so if we can get up to, 80 or 100, we'll just go ahead and get started. You are going to be able to join at any time. So if you haven't joined yet, but you wanted to, no problem. You can always join with the menti.com or the code, or you can obviously use the QR code now. So we got 86, 87 of us in here. So we're going to jump right into our questions. This is going to be a word cloud. So you have unlimited responses. So if you see somebody else put in a word that you feel really reflects your sense of belonging, you can repeat it. So we already have people that are saying safe, comfortable, accepted, um, and hopefully everybody can see the screen. So Kathy or Rebecca, if you can just confirm in the chat that you can see the screen, then I'll know that we're all good. Everyone can see the word cloud. Um, all right, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Doris. So you can see that as people are putting in these thoughts that different words are getting larger. A lot of people have done word clouds before, but you can always put in a word that you see that inspires you. You can put it in again to make it larger. So we can see kind of everybody's themes around what it requires to feel like you belong. So it requires some safety, some comfort in the environment, to feel accepted and valued. I see those things getting larger, a sense of community, you resulting in like happy. There's home. There's this term called home place that's worth Googling, especially for populations, uh, Black populations around culture, centering culture, creating home place and freedom dreaming. And it's worth exploring as far as creating sense of belonging, especially for Black populations in schools that are primarily white. And so how do you work to center culture to create a sense of belonging? So these are really important concepts that you all are bringing up around home place. So thank you, everybody. So we see this, it feels like this to belong. So if this is what it feels like, you feel loved, you feel this community, you feel safe and valued and secure. What are the characteristics of those places that lead to those feelings? Like, what does that space have to have for you to feel safe, for you to feel secure, for you to feel community, for you to feel home? Like, what is that space? So it needs to have love. It needs to be empathetic, needs to have some emotional safety. Oh, excellent. These are great. Some acceptance, some kindness, nurturing, people like me. So that representation is really important. Trust, love, inclusivity. I see that. Some diversity, welcoming people there, empathy, safety, listening, acceptance and respect, emotional safety. So we got 75 people contributing to this word cloud. You all, this even if we just like if we stopped the session right now and you just took these two things, like this is what it feels like to belong and this is what's needed to create belonging, you would be able to change the environments in which you're working and in which you're creating early childhood education. Because if you do this, you're creating superpower for your kids. You're creating superpowers for your families. And so even if you just thought about and brainstormed with your teams and your families, like what do we need to do to create an environment that's accepting, that centers kindness, that is welcoming, that we're making active, planned intentionality around inclusivity and trust and acceptance that's nurturing folks. If we had those conversations and we built that out, we've accomplished everything we need to accomplish to create a sense of belonging. So, in including that conversation, based on what we've also said, we need to be intentionally inclusive. We need to intentionally increase representation. We need to be non-judgmental. These are intentional things that we have to build into systems. When Dr. Dora talked about deconstructing the systems that require us to build protective factors, part of that is intentionally deconstructing and doing abolitionist work to realize that we need to decenter whiteness or look at the way that we change the systems in which our students are navigating in early childhood in all parts of their educational experience. So as we're building this out, we're going to naturally increase hope. One of the amazing things about belonging and hope is they're partners. They walk hand in hand. So as you increase belonging, you increase hope. And as you increase hope, you increase belonging. And we'll unpack hope a little bit later. But as you think of the word hope, and I'm not going to give you the answers to this, but as you think of the word hope, what automatically comes to your mind? So when you think of it and you think of having hope, what does it mean to you when someone has hope? Can't wait to see your responses. They have faith. So I'd love to deconstruct faith too. So the idea that there's a future perhaps is part of faith, like trust. Someone put their dreams changing for the better, having something to work. Some of you are already hitting on some of the scientific definitions of hope. So already with some of you may already have backgrounds in hope, some may have not have backgrounds in hope, but you are unpacking the science of hope, even as you're talking about this optimism. Optimism and hope are slightly different, but optimism does kind of inform some of the science of hope, but that idea that something better could happen is actually part of the science of hope. So that future piece that someone's putting in here, the optimism, these are all the dreams, the beliefs, these are all actually components of the science of hope. So it's not wishful thinking. That's one of the really important things that Dr. Chan Hellman and some of the other experts in hope, and there's a book called Hope Rising. I'll write it in the chat. It's a very easy read. It's a wonderful book, and it's by Dr. Chan Hellman, and I'm blanking on the other author, so forgive me if the other author ever watches this webinar. It's not uh, in any way on purpose. I forget, but Dr. Chan Hellman is at University of Oklahoma, and there's the Hope Center there, and the book is quite a easy read. And you'll get a lot more information about that if you're interested in hope. But everything that you're writing now is just trust in the future, just pops out to me as part of the science of hope. So I'm very excited to unpack that a little bit further. So let's think about it when you think about, and I often visualize this, if somebody lacks hope, how do we know if we just saw it? You walk into a room, you see somebody and you see that they lack hope. You're going to see that they're giving up, that they feel a deep despair. This is actually in the science of hope as well. So whoever wrote that, deep despair, despair is one of the consequences of a lack of hope. It's that when you walk in, I walked into like a middle school or a high school, I saw a kid head on the desk. Sometimes they're sleeping because they're not sleeping at night. But oftentimes it's just because some of the words you're saying, that despair, feeling defeated, pessimistic, no energy, these are all reflections of a lack of hope. Thank you so much, Kathy. So, and right, so when we think about what it is that we're trying to build, when you can think about that connectedness and belonging with, you're going to see that people tend to not have hopelessness as you build out that culture of inclusivity and that culture of uh, connectedness. And that's going to create one aspect of the science of hope, which is agency. So somebody having the feeling that they can do something is part of hope. So let's talk about the positive side. So when you think about someone that does have hope, what do you think that they would look or sound like? So this is the hopelessness is gone. We have hope. You're going to see them. Yeah, they're going to be dreamers for sure. And again, you're unpacking another piece of the science of hope, which is pathways. So we're going to get into this a little bit later. But when you see someone that is positive, happy, energetic, optimistic, but they're able to see a future, a path to the future, a dreamer that's going to take action and make plans, you're rocking and rolling. So people that are activating this sort of action for the future, that's a piece of hope. That's why hope is not like, I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you're doing well. Like I'll often write, I hope that you have like these are true things. Like I do wish that for them, but I should say, I wish that you had this or things like that, because hope is actually the science of pathways and agency. And so being able to see a path to the future, I think somebody wrote a doer, seeing that you can be a dreamer, that you have a path to achieve your dreams. These are all aspects of hope, really important hope. And then I see somebody knows the science of hope because they wrote in the word agency in there, or you've been listening already really well. So we're going to unpack this and talk about how do you build this and why is it such an important buffer for potential traumas from childhood. And adverse childhood experiences, I'm not necessarily writing this in the slide deck, but they start in the womb. So when we talk about this, we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we're talking about things that start very, very early. And they may or may not be they're not usually experienced necessarily the same way by two different people. So, for example, um, one of the average child experiences we'll get to in a second is often in the household like divorce. Well, two people could go through that depending on their age, depending on their relationship with the people getting divorced, and one person may be severely traumatized, and the other person would not experience trauma. And so when we talk about average child experience, we're talking about things that potentially could produce traumas, but not necessarily produce traumas. So we'll come back to that in just a quick second. I'm going to go through some of these baseline things very quickly so that we have time to talk about the positive buffering aspects of it. But students are struggling, even with early childhood. students are struggling even at a young age. And so when we get to these slides, I'll talk a little bit about, but this is what I'm talking about in a general way, and then we'll get more specific. So we know, and again, these slides are linked. Anytime you see a little link code, this is the link, and you can use this. And please, you don't need to cite me, but you'll need to cite your source. Um, but I try to make this so that you can use it for your own work. But basically, out of the post-pandemic world, and we haven't yet fully recovered from this, we see all sorts of um, traditional struggles around oppression, marginalization, disability disparities, access and opportunities lowered. Uh, all the types of things that we saw before the pandemic have basically widened and been made worse. And we haven't necessarily bounced back from that. So students are facing mental health and well-being challenges. Marginalized populations are facing additional challenges even beyond what was being faced before that. And we know from the data that it's having a profound impact on our youth and their mental health. So one of the things that's not listed in here is that suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents. And unfortunately, for middle school students, it increased 300% from 2007 to 2017. And before this, I was looking just for how early in childcare are we getting to as far as mental health issues. And we're seeing that suicide rates are going up even for elementary students. So it's getting lower and lower. Mental health issues are impacting kids at younger and younger ages. Again, when we get to adverse child experiences, we'll talk about a little bit of that, but we saw emergency room visits go up exponentially during the pandemic. We found that across the the world, much less in the United States, that anxiety went up for adults. So we had adults that were highly anxious, and then working with students and peers that were also highly anxious. So the mental health risks and impacts of the pandemic and post-pandemic are have been very severe. People are calling things an isolation pandemic, where people are feeling very disconnected. And we often know that you can feel disconnected and a lack of connectedness even when you're in the midst of a room with a lot of people. So one of the surveys that I use just to kind of illustrate the point is the Youth Truth Survey. Before the pandemic, they had almost 500,000 students complete this, and during the pandemic, about 300,000. And basically, what the students said, and you can use these slides again, there's linked, is that social emotional issues were and mental health became the #1 barrier to their academic success. So about half of the students said that depression, anxiety, or feeling stressed was making it very hard to do their best in school. And you can see that was the #1 indicator. Oh, excuse me, sorry. I'm gonna have to I paused my screen sharing because we were talking about this before. The computer had its own little mind, but I'm back now. So hopefully we can all see that still. I apologize for that interruption. And so it's been increasing, and we haven't seen. I would imagine I haven't looked at the anxiety, depression, and stress data from today, but I know from the CDC and the other national reports that it's continued to just be uh, a primary obstacle success for all students. So, average child experiences. Again, this is a free access slide that you can use. Originally in 1998, Dr. Bruce Perry and others focused on what this was in the tree. And this wasn't the first ACEs study, by the way, but this is the first one with a white middle class Kaiser Permanente in Southern California population. And so it got the recognition and the attention of the medical community. And now the CDC calls it really with the #1 health crisis in the United States is adverse childhood experiences. So since the 1998 study, Kaiser Permanente study, we went from the tree, what was kind of inside the household, which would be abuse, neglect, some of those are divorce, some of those types of issues. And the way that something gets labeled an adverse child experience is the research really shows that it loads into either current or future traumas or mental health issues that will show some of the outcomes of those things. And if you want to, if you have like a fist of five, zero being like no knowledge of ACEs at all, and five being like I could teach this, you can always express yourself in the chat where you're at, and then I can adjust the level of teaching around average child experiences based on the needs of the audience. But I'll assume that that with early childhood education, I got a lot of, yeah, threes and fours and fives. That tends to be sometimes happens. People come in with a pretty good knowledge base around ACEs. I do see a one or two. So for those that are one or two, this is a helpful slide for you. The next few slides, again, these are open access, so you can use these slides and just give credit to where they're sourced from. So for those that are out of one or two, one of the important things to know about adverse child experiences is that it's expanded the research that shows different things are loading into health outcomes or negative health outcomes have expanded quite significantly in 25 years. For example, the Philadelphia ACEs project has shown that racism is an adverse child experiences. And some of the research, there's obviously a lot of negative outcomes of that. Low birth rate was one of the ones that was illustrated. We know that in the womb, that the traumas or the experiences that the mother is having is going to directly affect the child. So one of my peers was talking about she has multiple ACEs, and so when she is trying to self-regulate, she actually listens to like AC/DC, like super rock and roll, high tempo music, and that actually helps her regulate and calm down because that's the heart rate that her mom had when she was in the womb. And so knowing exactly what is happening and how adverse child experiences affect outcomes for our early childhood children, but also their families is really important. You can see also environmental things. The World Health Organization has started to study wars, earthquakes, pandemics like we just had, immigration, all those types of things that can be affect people's outcomes. So the outcomes can be if you have four or more adverse child experiences, you are far more likely to die in your 50s, far more likely to have 50 or more sexual partners, unexpected pregnancies. You're more likely to have, as you can see, liver disease or COPD is something that I found like fascinating. That are cancers. People are going to have more likelihood to have cancers. The number of suicide and mental health issues goes up, anxiety and depression and other things. And you can see, again, this is a use, you can use this slide, just citing them. You can see how this kind of affects us. And there's another slide that kind of illustrates this as well. It's going to disrupt neurodevelopment. Actually, the research shows now it's also affecting our DNA. So it's getting all the way to the DNA level affecting people's ability. Before as in like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we knew that the neural sequences and the pathways is affecting those. And so if you're in working with early childhood and you're like, we need you to behave differently, you're going to have to teach those skills. So Dr. Bruce Perry calls it skill, not will. And so when you get into a family or a community or a school setting, and we're asking kids that have experienced trauma at any age, like young kids, at any age of kids, and we're expecting them to somehow have a brain pathway and a behavior that we haven't taught yet, then we're going to need to reteach. We're going to need to really do skill development to help people handle that. And Dr. Bruce Perry says the best thing for a dysregulated child is a regulated adult, and the worst thing for a dysregulated child is a dysregulated adult. So when we talk about grant funding or we talk about training to help people work with adverse child experiences, most of those focuses are on the adults in the building. So early childhood educators, family members. Um, these are the people we're training because these are the folks that are going to need the skills first before we are expecting our adults to be able to help the kids build the skills. Oops, here we go. Another slide from CA Narratives. This is a little dated, but it does talk about ACEs and then impact on the neurodevelopment, the psychosocial development, health risky behaviors, the behavior changes that happen, and then some of the outcomes that we know have been loaded into over time. So now we're going to buffer those things. So they have two different factors. I'm going to talk mostly about protective factors. There's emerging research the last 5 or 6 years called positive childhood experiences. The difference really in my mind is that positive child experiences, they've done the research that loads into ACEs directly. Protective factors have been around for much longer, and it's more of a broader psychological buffering approaches. So buffering traumas in general. So we're going to talk about protective factors right after we talk briefly about positive child experiences. But when you look at these, I just want you to notice how many relate to belonging or hope. So felt family stood by them during difficult times. That's belonging and hope. Talking about family, about feelings, you're going to increase connectedness. Community traditions, there's that connectedness. A sense of belonging in high school, there's belonging again. Felt supported by friends, connectedness and belonging. Two non-parent adults who took genuine interest. So you can see that all of these positive childhood experiences really are describing some sort of connectedness, belonging, relatedness to hope in some way. I've highlighted this to give you some a cheat sheet, but you can see with protective factors in general, there's a lot of protective factors that we can build in our families and communities. And pro-social friends means that someone who cares about you without getting something in return for that care. So it's like pro-socially, I care about you because you're my friend, not because I'm getting a return on my investment. And so when we have these type of belonging, engagement, self-efficacy, social emotional support, support from peer, class and peers, you're gonna have the ability to buffer some of the impacts of adverse child experiences. I'm going to go quickly, but there's a lot of research. So you have this slide deck. You can look at the research. You have the citations. You can Google Scholar the citations. But basically, the more protective factors that you have, the more you're going to be able to buffer the mental health impacts of the potential traumas or the traumas that were experienced with adverse child experiences. Again, we talked about that belonging being a superpower. So when you have those positive relationships with adults, when you're increasing belonging, you're going to have more school success. Some sort of feeling of engagement and feeling safe is going to increase your health. For those, unfortunately, that have experienced dating abuse, females that have experienced dating abuse in high school, bouncing back from that because you have social support has been shown to be effective. So we see that there are a lot of these protective factors that can buffer the impact of adverse child experiences. And again, you have these slides, but basically that connectedness, that hope, stronger social bonds, they're going to help psychological resilience. They're going to decrease the anxiety and depression and some of the mental health issues that can come out of adverse child experiences. So transition into hope and belonging specifically. Hope, the definition from Casey Gwynn, the co-author with Dr. Chan Hellman, hope's the belief that your future can be brighter and better than your past, and you actually have a role to play in making it better. So one of the authors that they cite, one of the original hope researchers and scholars that they cite in their book, the phrase that he uses a lot is, you can get there from here. So that phrase kind of illustrates hope in a nutshell. You can get there from here. And so you can see how that involves agency and pathways. So there is two things, and then goal setting is often very useful within these two areas as well. So agency is willpower or the belief that you can do that thing, and pathways is seeing that you have a path. So we talked about adverse child experiences earlier, and we talked about ecological um, adverse child experiences, which social determinants of health are often characterized within adverse child experiences. And if you Google social determinants of health, and some of you may already know about them, you're talking about access to healthcare, access to healthy food, access to good quality education, green spaces, and things like that. So you can see how pathways, if I don't see a future, I don't see a path, I don't see ways to move forward, even no matter what my age is, then I'm going to be far less hopeful. So this combination of these two things creates hope. There have been studies that, and again, I'm going to go rather quickly, but there have been studies that around the characteristics of well-being, and out of the 24 characteristics, the primary or largest characteristic that indicated well-being was levels of hope. We know for middle school and high school students that higher hope leads to all the outcomes that our educational leaders are really trying to prioritize, such as attendance and grades and test scores, not being at school. That in high school, there are going to be fewer absences, and there's going to be post-secondary enrollment rates go up. So everything that educators are really looking for is a product of hope. Hope is actually a better predictor of post-secondary success than ACT, SAT, or GPA. So knowing that people have, if I was creating my own school, I'd be basically measuring hope and belonging, and I'd leave it at that, because if there's high levels of hope and high levels of belonging, then I know that I'm going to have post-secondary success. I know I'm going to have strong academics. I'm going to have some sort of engagement with what's going on. So like I said, students are far more likely to be engaged in school. They're not going to miss school. They're going to do well in school. They're going to have excellent grades. All these are outcomes of hope. So hope for really is the perspective as a foundational protective factor. And hope and belonging, like I said, they walk hand in hand, and hope even predicts school belonging. We started with the opposite of hope, which is hopelessness. And what does that look like? The opposite of hope, the first stage down, is when our goals are significantly blocked, it can result in rage and anger. Somebody wrote in despair, and that's another second level. Like you're trying, you're really, you have a goal, you have agency, you want to go, and there's no pathways. And we can think about that around the way systems are structured. And we talk about deconstructing systems. and some abolitionist work in education because we want to create pathways. And the alternative is our students despairing. And then what's the result of despairing and the aftershocks of anger when that's gone? Apathy. And so you do walk in and you see apathetic students in schools. And so when we're thinking about how do we prevent this, then early childhood education around building hope and building connectedness and belonging is you're going to prevent apathy and despair later on. And so prevention is such a powerful thing. Hope is an amazing thing because it is so simple. You can create goal setting. You can work on, oftentimes when I do larger workshops, we'll even do adult hope before and after the workshop, and we'll talk about building hope even during the workshop. So you can build hope very quickly around helping people create pathways and create agency. And agency is the motivation. Agency is when somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, you can do this. It's having cheerleaders. It's having people that believe in you. Uh, so some of the ways to build hope again is empathizing, things that you put in the word cloud, being positive and affirming, making sure you center hope, be intentional about it, listening and asking questions, making sure that people are well, that they're getting enough self-care, that they have belonging and connectedness and things like that. We're going to skip the chat engagement just for time, but you can think about this as a prompt for you to think about in your own life with your family members, your friends, like how are you creating willpower boosters intentionally in your work? There's this rating scale that I put at the end of the slide deck for you to have. So it's for your future use. It's a valid and reliable instrument. It's only 6 questions. There's also an adult hope scale. So you can measure the adult levels of hope for those in your organization and work on that. And if you increase the levels of hope in the adults in the building, you teach them how to build hope with your early childhood educators and education in the kids, you're going to transform the culture of the environment in which you work. So hopefully that resource is helpful to you. I just put this slide here as a reminder for you to go look at it if you're interested in that at the end of the slide deck. So a couple tips. Again, if you're working with folks who experience a lot of adverse child experiences and a lot of trauma, then there's going to be need for really helping identify pathways and new ways to navigate through potentially limited cultural or ecological environments. Oftentimes you can pair people that have higher pathway scores with folks who have lower ones, and the people that have higher pathway scores will help creatively help people see new pathways, which is often helpful. And so you can, in that hope score, you can actually unpack agency and pathways, and it's all in the slide deck. So you don't have to guess at what's what, and you can actually work on both those things. So if somebody needs help with agency, you can get in there and help them with that. If somebody needs help with pathways, you can help them with that. So we've already defined belonging earlier as how often we're connected and feeling included by others. But it is a basic human need. And so I talked about the interchangeable words as well. We're not going to spend a lot of time on here, but this is something that we all need. When you think about who you're working with, whether it's like Chris saying in the community in which you're working, this is going to work for any age level to try to think about how are you really helping people feel like they're treated equitably, fairly, they have positive relations with their peers, whoever that peer group is, and with people who are like the adults around them. So how are you intentionally creating community takes a lot of work. I know of school districts that are really working on connectedness and belonging as an entire district initiative. And the effort that it takes to actually build and center the cultures of the students is really where, for me, belonging actually increases. So it's centering of student culture, centering of cultural traditions. It's not lip service. It's not stopping at high five at the door. It's actually knowing everybody's names, everybody's cultures, including family into that discussion. So things called funds of knowledge, or if you understand funds of knowledge, or Yasso's cultural wealth model is also something that's worth exploring if you're trying to center the cultures of your community. And these all, like I said, have a superpower for education and for mental health decreases or positive mental health increases. Struggle decreases, positive mental health increases. So everything that you're hoping for around life satisfaction, self-efficacy, self-esteem, these things are going to go up and mental health issues are going to be decreased. So belonging is pretty strong, so strong that the CDC, its number one recommendation for kind of addressing struggles in school and is to increase school connectedness, which is again belonging. So here's some examples, and then I'm going to get your wisdom, and we're going to crowdsource this thing for early childhood. So here's some examples that you can do with schools and families. So if you're early childhood and you're trying to center families in the work, here's the next few slides are going to be suggestions for doing that. And this is going to be our leaping off point to our final activity, which is going to be back to the Mentimeter. So you want to build hope and belonging. Help your child know they belong in whatever community they're in. So whatever age they're at, you do things intentionally to try to create their sense of belonging. Support the relationship with any teachers. That means you're gonna have to invest in the teachers and their sense of hope and their sense of belonging. Celebrate traditions and routines. So again, not lip service. Like one of the things we don't want to do is cultural voyeurism of like, what's the food like? And then stop at the food. Like you need to bring in and center the cultures and include them in the environment in which you're working. Support behaviors that build success and well-being overall, and then build relationships at home. So it breaks down some of these things in each of these slides, but again, we're going to use these intentionally as kind of a jumping off point. So what I mean by that is, as you think about where you're working, and I see if, people are putting great things in the chat as well. What is it that you can do in your environment to help somebody know that they belong? How do you celebrate them? How do you celebrate their cultures? How do you support that relationship with the adult? So again, thinking of willpower and weight power, you're thinking about hope and belonging going hand in hand. How do you ensure that somebody knows that they matter, that you see them? Sometimes we use that as like, you see that in very emotional scenes in movies or TVs where like, I see you, and then the person starts crying because they actually are like, oh, wait, this isn't, that term matters. Like you actually have a relationship where you're known. So how do you do that with young kids? How do you do it with families? You can do that also with celebrating traditions and routines, celebrating those in a really tangible way and making sure that everybody's included in those. And then again, supporting behaviors that build success and agency. So even problem solving skills, goal setting. Goal setting is a primary central focus of hope building. And so you can do that with little gains, like even just routines for young kids will help with getting in the habit of goal setting and building out hope. And then exploring and dreaming around what can possibly be can help with the pathway creation. And then how are we building great relationships at home? What kind of conversations are we having? When are we having them? So we'll brainstorm that. It can be anywhere. It might be on a walk. You might have game nights. You might be in a car. Anywhere you can have conversations where you're really, in some ways, forcing this relationship building, this belonging to happen. You're going to build hope. So early child, we're going to go back to the Mentimeter. I'm going to hopefully you may have closed it out. If you did, jump back in and we're going to crowdsource this. And we're going to just answer these two questions. How might we build hope in early childhood settings based on what you've learned so far? And secondly, do you have ideas for building belonging in early childhood settings? So again, hope being agency and pathways, and then the belonging as well. So let me share back to this. And this is our final activity of today to close us off before our questions and answer time. So let us go to the next prompt. How might we build hope in early childhood settings? And again, remodeling, reading together, talking about future one. Oh, I like that. Very tangible idea of like, we're going to talk about the future. That is going to create pathways. Love that. Really tangible. Listening, meaningful connections. These are fantastic. When I see things like creating safe environments, when I'm meaningful connections, then my next, if we were working together, I'd say unpack that. What are the three things we're going to do to create meaningful connections? What are three things we can do to create a safe environment? So when we talk about a descriptive like that, or like educate teachers, or warmth and caring, we've done this really nice description of what it is that we're going to build. But then I'm going to probably challenge you to say, well, tell me three things that you would do that would create that warmth and caring. Letting children try new things, excellent, no matter the age, and then connecting those to possibilities would create pathways and agency. Working with the classroom professionals, again, we work with the adults first before we even think about working with the kids in all of our grant work. And I love this comment around like, remember what it was like being a child. I think we often, the older that I get, the more separated I am from that experience. But when I remembered first coming out, it wasn't that long ago, and I could really kind of empathize with what it was like. Goal settings, huge one, supporting the interests, huge. Greeting every child daily is a great first step, and then following up with that, making sure we're connecting with staff and training the teachers on these. These are all wonderful ideas. Starting with ideas about the future, even if you're just dreaming. I think one of the things that when I get into elementary and middle school and people are saying, I want to be a professional football player, I never say, what's your backup plan? I don't do that. I say, that's amazing. What do you think we need to do for you to be a professional football player, a professional this, a professional that, a professional basketball player, a professional, whatever it is you want to be a professional? There's probably discipline involved. There's probably practice involved. There's probably goal setting involved. There's probably pathways that are needed, and agency is going to be huge. So let's do that. Let's figure out what is needed. And so then you can start creating like future dreams. So I don't ever want to be the 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 block to somebody's dreams. I would rather help them accomplish things on their way to their dreams, and create the way that they can create pathways to do that. Routines, not just physical safety, and creating felt safety. That's a beautiful phrase. I like that. Felt safety, not just physical safety. Those are two different things. Thank you for pointing that out. Allow for uniqueness and vulnerability. Very hard to be vulnerable for adults. So love that very much. Connections between teachers and children, and doing that intentionally. These are all fantastic ideas. In fact, I can share the results of this. Later on with Kathy, and we can somehow share this out because crowdsourcing all these things is just a fantastic way to build on these things. Look at all these ideas that you all have built out for hope. So I would love asking what they're doing. This is one owning your mistakes. You're modeling those types of things. Open about your dreams. I haven't seen this one before, and I think that is a fantastic one. The more that you can show dreaming, the more that they're going to be able to see that we're always dreaming and going forward. So let's finish off our crowdsourcing with belonging. So remember, belonging is that really connected to peers, feeling that felt safety. I'm going to use that term. That's somebody I'm going to refer to and cite the person who from now on. Somebody once put felt safety. I love that phrase. So how are we going to create that felt safety, that connectedness with peers, that connectedness with adults? So how do we do that? Learn to integrate their interests. I think that's a fantastic idea. One of the things we talk about the attendance, and I know with early childhood, I imagine that's a family, and so we're going to have to go into ecology. And so thinking about why would somebody want to attend? And so I always think of attendance as something that's often ecological, but also motivational. And so how do we get kids um, to where they just can't imagine not being excited about being there today? Peer-to-peer coaching and training, a great idea. Greeting every person in a meaningful way every day. These are fantastic ideas. Really listening to what students say. That's something that's so hard. We have so many things going on, so that you do have to be intentional and practice that. Representation in materials, representation in staff, representation in all sorts of different ways is so, so powerful. Inclusive. Um, I'm loving Chris is just dropping dimes over here in the chat. So hopefully y'all are gathering those as well, and we'll be able to share those out. Thank you, Chris, for doing that. And inclusive activities, building community, unpacking that, being like, how are we going to really build a community? We're going to have strategic strategies for doing that. And cultural competency and humility is something that's ongoing, and this is something that's going to continue and continue, but its core for building real connectedness and belonging is that cultural humility and centering others' cultures, centering all cultures. Celebrating praise and successes, encouraging friendships, being intentionally inclusive with I love the capital all, using strengths-based approach, huge. Um, Learn from students. I think that's a really powerful one. Small group projects and project-based learning. These are also great ways to build connectedness. Meals are a really wonderful way to build connection at home, much less at school. So using that meal time strategically. All these ideas are really powerful. I love that somebody pointed out one of the phrases we sometimes say is the world is built for extroverts, and so honoring introvertism and figuring out how to center that, and create opportunities for connection for neurodiverse populations and introvert populations and all sorts of pathways for connectedness is going to be required if we're going to really truly build belonging. These are fantastic ideas. So we're going to download these, gather them, and find a way to disseminate them to you. Crowdsourcing these are powerful ways to build connectedness. Surprise call. So this one is one I did as a school counselor, is I would call home intentionally for most of kids, but also to be honest, I would make sure that the kid that kind of had a reputation for struggling, I would be calling home often to praise them far before any call needed to go home around help, because I want to make sure to celebrate what was going on. Identifying our own biases, that implicit bias that we all have in different ways, is going to be really important. Um, Anytime that you have, I don't know what a child first center, you have one of those is fantastic. But when we talk about children first in schools, one of the things I'll say is if we're going to put children first, that means the system is going to change and adults are going to struggle because systems usually serve adults, not kids. And so if you really are going to put children first, what you're saying is we are going to put children first, which that we acknowledge means the system's going to have to change because the system doesn't serve all kids. The system serves some kids. So if we're really going to put children first, then the system's going to change and adults are probably going to struggle. We acknowledge that, and that's going to be our 3 to 5 year plan. We're going to figure out how to make that work. And we're going to change the system to put children at the center of what we do. Thank you all for this. This has been fantastic. I'm going to stop sharing. Again, we'll be able to disseminate your wisdom. Um, oh, Alan, that's a good point. I think the way that to acknowledge your prompt, I think that way that I phrased it was, uh, I just want to let you know that I've connected with so and so, and I just really appreciate the way that they did this or that. And the response that I got was actually nobody's ever called me before when they were in trouble. And so I haven't had that response that you're writing. I'm not, that's totally possible. But the response that I actually got was nobody ever called me before when my kid wasn't in trouble. And so we can kind of go approach it in a sensitive way, but really just modeling. I just wanted to call home and appreciate your kid, and we're here to support you and kind of give specific examples of that. So let's see, Q&A stuff. Um, Hope and self-efficacy are slightly different. Self-efficacy is powerful and it can contribute to hope. So I wouldn't necessarily, you basically just don't conflate them. You don't call them the same thing, but you can build on self-efficacy as kind of a contributor to building hope. Um, how do we do this in light of the current political environment and actions both in Ohio and at the national level? Well, this is a recorded webinar. So what I would say is uh, I one of the things we've just talked about right now is knowing the limits of the law. So like what does the law actually require? And not do anticipatory you know, not particularly having the right term come to mind, but just where we're aligning with something that we're anticipating and we're giving up the ability to advocate for the needs of all of our kids in anticipation of political actions that may be coming down the line but aren't actually law. So the first answer that I would say is know the law and what is the actual limits of the work, and then don't anticipate adjusting before you know the limits of the law and continue advocating in the way um, to move forward. So let's see. Names of authors of some of their earlier research on ACEs prior to the 1998. Oh, I wrote an article on this. If you want to reach out to me by email, I can send you the article. There was two, I believe, don't quote me, but I believe it was two studies before the 1988 studies, and they were both with excuse me, urban populations of color. And so I think that and again, I want to go back to the scholarship, but I think the response was, well, yes, we have urban populations that are experiencing trauma. That's going to lead to negative outcomes, but not quite the capture that the middle class white population gathered in 1998. Hope measurement scales are at the end of the slide deck. So there's a children's hope scale and there's an adult hope scale. And if you use the link, you'll have both of them. Um, Elizabeth, good question. Citizenship, good friends awards, etc. Do they help, or since they can only be given to a few, does it make others feel too left out? I've not really studied citizenship and good friends awards and things like that. So this is just kind of off the cuff answer. But I tend to like backwards design. What I mean by that is, what's your goal? Like, what are you trying to get out of the citizenship and good friends awards? Like, what are you trying to create as far as your community? And then my mom was a first grade teacher, so people will ask like, when did you start working in education? And I answer like, well, I was 10. I was in fourth grade and I was working in my mom's classroom, and she had seven languages, and this is Northern California, and a large Hmong population. And it was just really helpful for me to realize everybody in the classroom really felt connected. And how did she create that environment? What was I watching? And it was around the ability to fail, make mistakes, the ability to be seen, the connectedness, the belonging. So I think as long as you have the intentionality around how you're using multiple strategies to create those connectedness around kids of any age, because she was first grade, um, yeah, I don't think I think you're gonna know after you do it if there was negative outcomes. Oh, thanks for letting me know. Apparently the hope scales didn't weren't included in the slide deck, so we'll send those out separately. I'll make sure you have both the children and the adult scales. So apologies on that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Zyromski. This has been a wonderful presentation and conversation, and I really appreciate everyone in the chat and question and answer and providing resources there and all of the engagement from our audience. So thank you all. One question I had for you in the few minutes we have left is, can you talk about like the longitudinal stability of some of these factors? So for fostering hope and belonging in early childhood, how do we make sure we're doing that in a way that's going to translate or persist into these later childhood and adolescence when we know some of these problems really come up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I think that because hope and belonging go hand in hand, I think you can start with looking at the connectedness and building the belonging. And the other thing that people, I think someone wrote in, or maybe you just mentioned the resiliency. And when we think about that, we think about the ability to bounce back. So not necessarily just navigate. And so if you have the buffers and the connectedness, then those are going to translate if you're creating kind of um, one of the terms that Dr. Renee Mays uses in one of her amazing articles is freedom dreaming for African American populations and that home place. And so the ability to see people that are like you, the ability to see representation, to be able to see somebody achieving things, and then be able to see pathways to that, whether you're five or you connected with peers at or like if you're 3 or 4 and you're feeling like you have a place where you belong and people see you and value you, then I think you're going to create that bounce back ability later on.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great. And the comments that we're getting in the chat are really reflecting everyone's appreciation for you as well. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a great time. And as you mentioned, I've really enjoyed the chat and people's wisdom that they've been sharing and all the resources. So thank you to those that have been sharing resources. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining and sharing today. When you leave the meeting today, a very short survey will pop up. Please do fill that out if you're able to. We really do value your feedback and use it to inform future events at Crane. Thank you so much for joining and have a great day.
Thank you.